Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, but real quick on the topic of Altria, because you reminded me of something. So again, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, which is where Philip Morris is based out of, and I believe that's also where the Altria headquarters is as well.
Yeah.
And so when I lived there, I signed up, so you can do these like focus groups at Altria where you can they'll pay you to test tobacco products. And I think I might have told you guys this, but I signed up for one. I wanted to do a smoking study, and I couldn't get on. I couldn't get on one. They kept filling up. So then I saw that they were offering a study for dip, for chewing tobacco products, which I don't even really do. But I went in and lied about it and told them that I did. And I guess they I did this whole questionnaire or whatever. They were trying to find, I guess, whatever target market they were looking for this focus group or whatever. So long story short, I got on the focus group, and it ended up being, it was a 2-year-long study, twice a week. yeah, twice a week.
What?
Twice a week for 2 years. I went in, and they paid me $75 a session. So they paid me $150 a week for 2 years to go, and someone who doesn't dip. No, so anyway, but it was a small group. It was only like 8 of us on it, and it was funny because when I got in there, half the other guys in there also didn't dip and just lied about it to get the money, and so it was like a 2-year-long thing, and we weren't even after the initial training, we weren't supervised at all. We'd just go in there and they'd give us the product, and they'd give us so basically what we had to do, it wasn't like an opinion type thing. It was it was called taste quality perception. So what they wanted was they gave us a control product, and then they gave us a different product, and then we had to on a scale that they'd given us and different taste characteristics or whatever, we had to rate on a scale of 1 to 7 how alike or similar the second product was from the control. And if that sounds convoluted and something you could just fucking bullshit every single time, you'd be absolutely right, because that's what that's what all of us did. So they basically got two years. Paid us a total of paid me $16,000, I think, over 2 years. Times that by 8, paid that amount of money for 2 years of completely, utterly worthless data from us.
I love it.
Well, we just basically it was just like a boys' club. We just went and hung out. It was the same. It was the same people for 2 years. We got close. We started playing poker and shit on the weekends. You know what I'm saying? It was really just a social event. It was pretty cool, man.
I'm just imagining it now. If you find out secretly over it's a movie, right? Over the course of a few sessions, you find out everybody's full of shit, and it's just this one flew over the cuckoo's nest type fucking thing where you're scamming to get on the inside to
Yeah, it ruled, dude. It was so good. It was so much fun.
You have a Nurse Ratched type who's watching you all really closely.
Well, it's funny because we had one of those classic kind of what your idea of what a focus group looks like. We had on one of the walls, it had that two-way mirror. I'm pretty sure most of the time there was nobody back there, but from time to time you could kind of see through it. You could see there was maybe a light or something on. I think we were supervised from time to time, but mostly we were just, and those were the times that we had to pretend we were actually this one's this one's different. You know what I'm saying? And write something down. But when most of the time I would just come in and just sit down and not even always even do the product. I would just sit down, fill out the paper, and then just bullshit for an hour, and then they give me $75. It fucking ruled, dude.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I have those big dreams.
Welcome back, everybody, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight Rhinoceros. We have with us Shane.
Howdy, folks.
And Chris.
Sup?
this week I am really excited because this is something that I had wanted to do since we started talking about doing this podcast, and it's basically attacking, or rather going over, I guess we could say politely, a family that has been well-trodden by a lot of other media. It's a family you know and love, and of course I'm talking about the Bushes. And specifically the kind of lineage of the Bush dynasty that we're going to go over today. Now, there's a couple of reasons why I thought this would be a good topic to get into, or a good crop of people to get into. I mean, first of all, they're like just a very nakedly evil family. Again, almost.
Perhaps you called the Waltons maybe our nation's shittiest family, but I think that the Bushes might actually take that prize.
Yeah, it's stiff competition for sure.
Outstanding in their categories at the least.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I mean, you don't want to take away too much from either of them. Even a silver in that competition would do pretty well. Yeah, they're kind of thoroughly just corrupt and evil. I mean, you can pull on any fucking thread and the entire thing just falls apart immediately. And like I said, this is sort of well-trod territory. I think that's one of the reasons why it sometimes feels a little like old hat to talk about this stuff. There is no shortage of material on the Bushes, particularly, the magnificent presidents that we've gotten out of their family, and we are going to talk about them today. But I initially started thinking about doing them now because there's always a question of like, why now? Why are you talking about certain things now, right? Like, obviously, we all know that the Bushes are horrible. I mean, if you're listening to this show, you should already know that. Like, I don't think we're going to be able to give you the wide breadth and context.
We're not out to convert anybody here.
Yeah.
We're not out to win the hearts and minds.
Yeah, we'll leave that part up to the troops.
Yeah. And then they'll be greeted with roses.
But yeah, in terms of thinking about why now, last week when we had Ellie on, we were talking about contemporary fascism in America, and specifically the ties that neo-fascism has to corporate America, or just more broadly, the ties that fascism always has to capitalism and corporate capitalism. The reason why this sprung to mind is because, history does repeat itself, and in the early 20th century, again, something that came up last week, the initial fascist movements that grew up in Europe had very strong ties to industrial capitalists. They were financed by them, they were supported by them, they eventually came into allegiance with them. I mean, Mussolini very famously came up with the formula for fascism, which is just corporations taking over the government. And at its core, fascism being sort of ideologically bereft, that's really what it is. It's a method of the far right to reintroduce these elements of, barbarous brutality in order to break the workers' movement and the labor movement. That's something that's always present in any kind of iteration of fascism. And it's a little easy, of course, to always just call your political enemies fascist, or call anybody on the far right, or even just on any conservative to begin with fascist. I mean, that's something that a lot of us, have struggled with. I mean, I've certainly had times in my life where I've just, been on the line at the bank for too fucking long, and I'm just like, these are all fascists,
Fascists.
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, that is proving itself to be true.
Yeah, no, but that's the thing, right? There is an element of truth of that. And so I was thinking about, like we were talking about in our intro a little bit, these kind of weird remembrances of the George W. Bush era. And there was a lot of stuff thrown around then by both the left and the kind of more mainstream liberals of comparisons of Bush to Hitler, all the stuff that we're seeing now with Trump, right? Again, some of it is kind of cringy. I think a lot of people in our generation tend to think of it that way because of the ages that we were at that time. And so we remember I was a fucking idiot teenager, and I was making these conflated things, and so it can be a little bit weird to make that connection, right? To just say, okay, the people I disagree with are Nazis, right? But they are. On further re-examination, they are actual fucking fascists and Nazis, and it's not just a little cringy thing to say, and there's actually quite a bit of support for that. So to start off, I wanted to talk about Prescott Bush. And, there's an obvious starting place here because he is the grandpappy of the Bush, the male lineage of the Bush dynasty that we're going to go over today. But also, again, in tying to what we've been talking about, he was a financier for the Nazis.
Excuse me?
A financier for the Nazis. And that's
No,
not...
I heard you, but What?
And that's not metaphorical. I'm not speaking in hyperbole. I'm not using Nazis as an allegory or anything. The actual Nazis.
The Democrats?
Yeah. So I'm going to read here from Dinesh D'Souza.
Yes.
No, I'm going to read here from a piece very aptly called The Bush-Nazi Connection that I got from this book that I talked a little bit about and I posted all over Twitter by Marcel Reuters. And again, this is from 2004, and it kind of provides a broad history here. Much has been said about Hitler's affinity for the occult, along with some of his cronies like Hess or Himmler. While Hitler's charismatic spell over the German crowds during his speeches was uncanny and can be easily labeled as demonic, his meteoric rise to power has little to do with his astral sign or the legendary spear of Longinus. Like any aspiring politician, Hitler needed money, lots of money, and corporate business was eager to provide it. The list of Nazi sponsors is fairly well known today. IG Farben, Krupp, Bosch, Siemens, ITT, Ford, DuPont, General Electric, Standard Oil, and so on. Without a doubt, the most generous supporter was Fritz Thyssen, then head of the almighty Thyssen Corporation.
Which, by the way, now is ThyssenKrupp,
Yes.
a merger of two of the companies that you've probably been on a ThyssenKrupp elevator within the last month, whoever's listening.
Of course, many corporations financed the Nazis for opportunistic reasons, but Thyssen's relationship with Hitler is reported as a cordial one. The NSDAP, which is the Nazi Party, was able to buy the prestigious Braun House in Munich and make it their headquarters, thanks to a gift of 100,000 gold marks from Thyssen in 1923. We are talking old money here, but it was the great patriarch August Thyssen who had made the company into one of Germany's leading industries by the beginning of the 20th century. Without its guns and cannons, Germany could not have started World War I, a war that left the country in ruins and the Thyssens with even greater riches. Much of their money laundering went through the bank Voorhandel and Scheepvaart, cleverly established in Holland in 1926. In his apologetic, ghost-written autobiography, I Paid Hitler, Thyssen claimed that he quit supporting the Nazi Party in 1939 after he realized what they were planning for the Jews.
This is if I did it.
Right, exactly. And again, 1939 is still a pretty late time to be able to...
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Ordain what possibly the Nazis had planned for the Jews, right? He further claimed that he himself was persecuted by the Nazis, fled to Switzerland, and was finally captured in 1942 in Vichy, France. However, official documents prove that he was able to travel freely until then. Much of the money that was being made went to America via the BHS-owned Union Banking Corporation, located at 39 Broadway. The BHS Union Banking Corporation, located at 39 Broadway. It's here where we meet Prescott Sheldon Bush.
Fucking hell.
Prescott Bush was made vice president of the UBC by his father-in-law, George Herbert Walker, in 1926 after marrying Walker's daughter, Dorothy. Together with his partners Harriman and Brown Brothers, he is at this point an employee of the Thyssen firm. He is also involved with the newly formed German Steel Trust, thanks to Dillon Reed, a friend of his father, Samuel Bush. Many Wall Street players of the era were endorsing totalitarianism. The Bushes, Walkers, Harrimans, Lovetts, Brown Brothers, who had become rich from shipping slave cotton, the Rockefellers, and the Bank of England, even the Warburgs, who stayed in Germany until 1938, when life had already become unbearable for common Jews.
What the fuck?
In 1927, Averell Harriman reported to the UBC about his fruitful meeting with Mussolini.
What the fuck?
Harriman and Walker had taken control of the steamship company Hamburg America Line back in 1920. In the years prior to Hitler's election as chancellor in 1933, the firm had been crucial for the armament of the SS and the SA, who are the stormtroopers. Tons of revolvers and machine guns were smuggled into the country via Holland's River Delta to obstruct and terrorize the opposition. The guns were made in the United States by Remington and Thompson. So just to clarify and explain what is being said there is that for those who are maybe not historically aware, fascism in all of its iterations starts as kind of brutal thugs and street gangs, paramilitary groups running around to intimidate their enemies, to break up strikes, etc.
That sounds a little familiar.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, right. The stormtroopers were known in particular to go to communist meetings and any kind of left-wing demonstration to start fights, break skulls, and all of that kind of thing. And eventually, on a long enough trajectory, these things escalate. The street fighting becomes street shooting. And so what's being said here is that these American firm was involved in smuggling American-made guns, luckily because of our Second Amendment, we have tons of them available. We were able to smuggle them into Nazi Germany, the Weimar Republic, rather, to the beginning of the the Nazi Party to allow them to engage in their paramilitary activities.
Well, it's a good thing we don't have to worry about that because they're already armed.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's no need to smuggle.
The hard part's already taken care of.
So here's to your question earlier, Chris. Max Warburg of Hamburg, their representative at the time, the representative of this particular firm, protected the Bushwalker clan from allegations of support to anti-Semitic forces in Europe. With this famous Jewish banker as their associate, their business seemed all kosher to the American sponsors. Walker, Harriman, and Bush were not too bothered by being partners to top Nazi Friedrich Flick, either, who together with Thyssen owned the coal and zinc mines and steelworks of the Consolidated Silesian Steel Corporation, situated in southern Poland. In 1934, problems arose with Polish accusations of mismanagement and embezzlement. Flick retaliated by replacing the Polish workers with Germans to continue his contribution to the buildup of Hitler's war machine. This dispute was ended by the Blitzkrieg. For most people, the start of the Second World War felt pretty much like the end of the world, but not for the Walker-Bush dynasty and their friends. Harriman International Co., led by Averell Harriman's cousin, Oliver, who had been responsible for German exports to the U.S. since 1933, as was agreed between Hjalmar Schacht and John Foster Dulles. And Dulles, obviously, is another kind of shady character that keeps cropping up in American foreign policy, especially in relation to the Nazis.
And the Bushes.
And the Bushes. While millions were slaughtered, business went on as usual. That is, until October 20th, 1942. Under the Trading with the Enemy Act, the government seized the stock shares of the Union Banking Corp., of which the bulk was owned by E. Roland Harriman, on the 28th of October. Also, the Holland American Trading Corp. And Seamless Steel Equipment Corp., run by UBC, followed, November 17th. Interests in the Silesian American Corp. Were seized. But that was about all the Roosevelt administration did against these blatant acts of treachery. Was it because the scandal would be too demoralizing for the troops who had been sent into war a year before?
So to be clear here, just to clarify, we're talking late 1942. We're not talking, 1937. We're not even talking after the invasion of Poland in 1939. We're talking after the United States has already entered the war.
Yeah, almost a year after
exactly,
that.
Exactly. The Bush family is still right. Doing business with Nazi Germany.
But I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me, Shane, because what about the long-standing American tradition of jailing bankers that harm people?
Well, right, of course. I mean, again, the fact that they were able to get away with this so blatantly, and this is something that as soon as I'm finished with this piece, I'll get into another little component of this story. But, like as was mentioned here, a lot of the business community was very pro-Hitler. Even the people who weren't explicitly pro-Nazi or interested in German geopolitical ambitions, or even to a certain extent anti-Semitism, they liked Hitler and his ilk because of the way that fascism protects business interests.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest threat to big business then and today is always going to be, a leftist revolution. It's always going to be a communist revolution. If you can count on someone like Hitler, who's going to be a strong man and who's going to, crush these revolutions and crack down on any sort of communist activity, of course they're always going to side with the fascists.
In a move to clear the family's name, George H.W. Bush, who had turned 18, was sent to join the Air Force. George Bush was shot down in a battle over the Pacific and given a Medal of Honor. However, rumor has it that he bailed out too soon and left his two co-pilots to die in the plane, just to save his own hide. He did better than his father. Prescott Bush had been exposed as a fraudulent war hero in World War I in France, much to his embarrassment.
Okay, I can respect stealing valor. Don't make me like the guy here. Sean.
Yeah. I mean, he did supply weapons and tons of front money to the Nazis, but he also did steal valor, so who could say if he's bad or not? Okay, so just wrapping up the war and the kind of post-war moment here, which gets very important for how this directly affects the future of the Bush family, right? So 1945, Hitler commits suicide. The nightmare of World War II was finally over. Or was it? Then there was, among other things, the matter of the Nazi loot, which was being rapidly relocated over the globe. Considering the fact that such powerful Americans had been in league with the Nazis, it comes as no surprise that so many got away. For instance, Friedrich Flick only served 3 years in jail, then got his money back, and he died a billionaire in 1972. The man who pardoned Flick in 1951 1951 was John J. McCloy, the legal counselor for I.G. Farben in the U.S. This was the firm that operated the concentration camps. McCloy was one of the men that obstructed the bombing of the railways to those camps. He went on to work for the Ford Foundation, the biggest American Nazi sponsor, the Manhattan Chase Bank, and eventually became president of the World Bank. He also pardoned Thyssen, Schacht, and Krupp.
Nobody can hear this, but for the past few minutes, I'm just shaking my head like I've been stabbed. I feel terrible. I can't even wrap my head around this.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, didn't one of the prosecutors of Nazi war crimes recommend that Prescott Bush himself be prosecuted for collaborating with the enemy?
Mm-hmm. I mean, he eventually was able to skirt it through a bunch of kind of, almost just PR maneuvers.
I mean, this was we haven't even gotten to the fact that it becomes a senator.
Right here. This will bring us up to speed here and just kind of cover a few more other characters in this tale. General William H. Draper Jr., who had been working with Bush for the Thyssens and financed the International Eugenics Congress in New York in 1932.
Shane, stop.
Was appointed to denazify German corporate business. Also, Allen Dulles worked with Bush as a legal counselor, spy for I.G. Farben and Standard Oil, which were controlled by the Rockefellers before, during, and after the war. Together with the German master spy Gerhard Gehlen, Dulles arranged for the secret immigration of 760 scientists who were hardcore Nazis into the U.S. This is now known as Project Paperclip. These are the guys who built the space rockets.
Was Werner von Braun part of it?
Werner von Braun, yes, yeah. In 1951, Fritz Thyssen died in Argentina. Womp womp. Prescott Bush and his father-in-law reclaimed the Union Bank from the U.S. alien property custodian and were able to cash in their shares for a cool $1,500 each. In short, it took quite some clever scheming to conceal the origin of the Bush fortune and change their public image to this. In 1952, Prescott Bush was elected as senator, and his offspring, presidential material.
What the fuck?
So, again, the particular thing there is that not only did they supply the financial backing and basically run the money laundering schemes for the local German companies that were providing the financial backing for the early Nazi party and then later the Nazi war machine, but they also were able to manipulate the fact that since a lot of those assets were seized and were held in limbo after the war, they were able to buy them back really easily and then sell them off, and thus making a killing, literally, from the profits. To bring us up to speed a little bit more, I have some more details I'd like to read about this from a Guardian article that came out in 2004 around this time, and in particular because it gets to a certain reaction that, Dwight, I think you're going to both at first love and then get really pissed off if I can keep reading here.
Don't hurt me, but go ahead.
So this is from a Guardian piece in 2004 by Ben Aris and Duncan Campbell, and I'm just going to read kind of snippets from it. There was nothing illegal in doing business with the Thyssens throughout the 1930s, and many of America's best-known business names invested heavily in the German economic recovery. Again, recovery, read as build-up.
Rearmament.
Yeah, rearmament. However, everything changed after Germany invaded Poland in 1939. That's an award-winning sentence. Even then, it could be argued that BBH was within its rights, continuing business relations with the Thyssens until the end of 1941, as the U.S. was still technically neutral until the attack on Pearl Harbor. The trouble started on July 30th, 1942, when the New York Herald Tribune ran an article entitled, "Hitler's Angel has $3 million in U.S. Bank."
What?
UBC's huge gold purchases had raised suspicions that the bank was in fact a secret nest egg hidden in New York for Thyssen and other Nazi bigwigs. Thyssen's partner in United Steelworks, which had coal mines and steel plants across the region, was Friedrich Flick. Again, we talked about him. Another steel magnate who also owned part of I.G. Farben, the powerful German chemical company. Frick's plants in Poland made heavy use of slave labor from the concentration camps in Poland. According to a New York Times article published on March 18th, 1934, Flick owned 2/3 of CSSC, while American interests held the rest. And American interests are here in quotes. And this is the implication that Prescott Bush's involvement comes in, right? The U.S. National Archive documents show that BBH's involvement with CSSC was more than simply holding the shares in the mid-1930s. Bush's friend and fellow bonesman, that's from the Yale Skull and Bone Society, Knight Woolley, another partner at BBH, wrote to Averell Harriman in 1933, warning of problems after the Poles started to their drive to nationalize the plant. And then it gets into the story of how they used the Germans to crush that drive. Silesia was quickly made a part of the German Reich after the invasion, but while Polish factories were seized by the Nazis, those belonging to the still neutral Americans and some other nationals were treated more carefully, as Hitler was still hoping to persuade the U.S. to at least sit out of the war as a neutral country. Schweitzer says American interests were dealt with on a case-by-case basis. The Nazis bought some out, but not others. 2 Holocaust survivors, suing the U.S. government and the Bush family for a total of $40 billion in compensation, claim both materially benefited from Auschwitz slave labor during the Second World War. Kurt Julius Goldstein, 87, and Peter Gingold, 85, began a class action suit in America in 2001, but the case was thrown out by Judge Rosemary Collier on the grounds that the government cannot be held liable under the principle of, quote, state sovereignty.
What?
Jan Lissman, one of the lawyers for the survivors, said President Bush withdrew President Clinton's signature from the treaty that founded the court, not only to protect Americans, but also to protect himself and his family.
Get the fuck out of here.
And so I'm just going to pop out of the article right now to point out that in 2002, after 9/11, George W. Bush withdrew the United States from the International Criminal Court. And this was right after the lawsuit against his family to be prosecuted by the International Criminal Court for, its responsibility in the build-up to Nazi Germany, but also, of course, under the auspices of the global war on terror, the idea was we should need to withdraw from the International Criminal Court so we can never be held accountable for the fucking things we're about to do.
Yeah.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
It's a win-win. They literally, he literally knew exactly what had happened in history, and the fact that the unbelievable acts of brutalism that they ended up inflicting on people as a state, the history just fucking repeated itself, and he made fucking money off of it.
Mm-hmm. So just to wrap up here, talking about this lawsuit, in their claims, Mr. Goldstein and Mr. Gingold, who is the honorary chairman of the League of Anti-Fascists, and that's pretty cool, suggest the Americans were aware of what was happening at Auschwitz and should have bombed the camp. The lawyers also filed a motion in The Hague asking for an opinion on whether state sovereignty is a valid reason for refusing to hear the case. A ruling is expected within a month. Lissman said, if we have a positive ruling from the court, it will cause President Bush huge problems and make him personally liable to pay compensation. The U.S. government and the Bush family deny all the claims against them. Of course, no surprise there, and this case was eventually dropped.
No surprise there either.
No.
So, again, just to put a little button on this, it's not simply, like, in terms of who Prescott Bush is, I'm not going to talk about his political career too much. I mean, a lot of it is public record. You can look it up. He was a right-wing Republican, kind of more of like a Rockefeller Republican. It was before the Republican Party had turned into, like, the Evangelical Party, which is largely, in part, responsible because of his grandson, and maybe we'll talk about that. But, like, him interpersonally, it's not to claim that, like, he personally was a Nazi or anti-Semitic or any of those kinds of things, and this is the stupid...
That's not even what it's about at that level. It's about this. It's just business.
Right, exactly. That's the whole point. Is that at the end of the day, the reason why these rich motherfuckers align themselves with fascism or turn a blind eye to it or, kind of lend just, these weird hem and haw, like, concerns about them at most, is because at the end of the day, they see that it's in their class interest to ally themselves with a group
Absolutely.
that, again, is willing to go in and fucking break up strikes. Now,
exactly.
I'm sure you guys are aware of the business plot. There's a little kind of known thing in American history from the 30s. A lot of people on the left do tend to talk about it, though. But basically, after Roosevelt started the New Deal, there was this short-lived attempt by a number of America's leading business and banking magnates to just take over the government. And it was eventually uncovered by Smedley Butler, famously very cool guy, one of the coolest troops of them all, just because, he stopped them and also kind of went on to become a populist anti-war activist and stuff. No surprise, it only took me a little bit of digging around to confirm that Prescott Bush was part of the business plot. And so this was in the early 30s. And again, this is, what they were reacting to wasn't the actual harsh conditions of the Depression. They were reacting to the government trying to step in and ameliorate those concerns for the working people of the country. And they're saying well, if that's going to happen, we might as well try fascism. Because under fascism, instead of people, striking at our factories, we could just send in these goon squads with, fucking Tommy guns to break them up. Which is what they were doing anyway. They just wanted a legal backing to it, and they didn't want to be able to be challenged by the government. So again, that's why when people make these associations between these evil industrialists and fascism, or make these connections, it doesn't have to be this direct kind of personal thing, which is this stupid roundabout conversation that people have is does so-and-so, really hate this group of people, or you deal with this kind of thing with the woke capitalism stuff. I mean, if you think about what we were talking about last week with fucking Mr. Bezos, I'm sure him interpersonally is some kind of milquetoast liberal or whatever who believes in some, very generic sense of multicultural equality. But I guarantee you, if there start to be giant strikes and stuff at Amazon warehouses, and some group like the 3%ers or the Proud Boys volunteer to go in and break up the strike for them, if they he'll arm them, I guarantee you he'll at least consider for a moment doing it if he doesn't outright do it.
Absolutely.
Because that's all they give a shit about at the end of the day, is protecting their money and protecting their manufacturing property and shit.
Well, that fucking sucked. I don't even know another way to put it. I'm just I feel like I just got punched in the gut.
And again, that's the next turn, just based on the predictive logic of what we've seen already. If these camps don't get abolished in one way or another within the space of the next election cycle, they're going to be turned into slave labor camps, like private prisons already are.
Oh man,
that'll be the next thing. It'll be rounding up people at the border and putting them into weird fucking Amazon fulfillment facilities or something.
Yeah, because we know from what we've learned in the last episode and this, that the liberal response to fascism is, pretty similar to the conservative one. Well, we don't like it, but...
And again, that's something that to point out, what Chris was saying at the time in Germany, Fritz Thyssen and his brother, you had a lot of liberal German industrialists who supported the Nazis, or basic people who weren't insane anti-Semites and stuff were sure, we can use this guy and his gangs to, protect our industries from these crazy communists or whatever. Because at the end of the day, all of that stuff is just all of the kind of social policy stuff. I mean, obviously it's very important, and I'm not trying to diminish how significant an open attitude towards social liberal policies are. But for the rich elite, that's just performative set dressing that fucking hides their class interests. And at the end of the day, they don't really give a shit about any of that if their money gets threatened. That's what they care about. They'll do anything to protect that. Even if within their own circle of friends, they want to be well, whatever, we're all equal and I'm not racist or whatever. I just want to subjugate the majority of the planet so that I can maintain my several swimming pools. That's what they give a shit about.
How different is that from people, from conservatives now being well, I don't like this Trump guy all that much. I'm not a big fan of his, but, I got to support him, and he's doing a good job.
The economy is doing well. That's what they always say.
Exactly.
They say I don't like the fact that he literally is threatening to kill everybody in the southern hemisphere. But the stock market's doing pretty well. So
jobs are coming back, baby.
So yeah, that's a little bit about Prescott Bush, the loins from which our politics were just splattered across the Bible Belt. Oh, he's dead too, so it's okay to say stuff about him, everybody. You can say whatever you want about him on Twitter, online, just to your family.
Can we take a break here so I can go hit my head on a wall?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of insider info on Prescott Bush and his evil doings. Now let's hear about his equally shitty son, Chris.
Arguably more shitty.
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's
it's a tall order. It's a tall order, dude.
He's got big shoes to fill. So I guess when talking about George H.W. Bush, like you were saying about Prescott, so much of this is well tread. So much of this is in the public record, and I don't want to focus on his political career as much. And I also I'm not going to focus on his his very early life as much because, we already know, where his money came from. He was born into it. He was born into an incredibly wealthy family, not just on the Bush side, not just on the Prescott Bush side, but so Prescott Bush married a woman named Dorothy Walker, who was the daughter of a wealthy banker named George Herbert Walker, after whom both George Herbert Walker Bush and George Walker Bush are named. Now, in an earlier episode, I think it was the Waltons one, I made this sort of kind of offhand comment about how, so many of these assholes are just sort of simply living off the dividends of like residual slave wealth or something. And I kind of made it almost like as a joke or something. But the Walker side of the family literally did make its fortune off the slave trade. The Walker family of Maryland owned slaves at their plantation. And I guess he's the great, I don't know how many fucking greats, grandfather of George W. Bush, a man named David Walker, was literally a slave trader in the 1700s, responsible for the shipment of human property out of West Africa. Now, sure, 300 years ago, sins of the father or fucking whatever, but I mean, that's bullshit, ultimately. I would like to think that if I had inherited vast amounts of wealth that I knew had been hoarded through the trafficking of human property, wealth that in any kind of just and rightly organized society would have been expropriated and redistributed generations ago. And then not only that, but also adding to that wealth by profiteering off the Nazi war machine. That I would think, I don't know about you guys, but I would think that's the kind of knowledge that would weigh heavily on my soul. And then perhaps if I became president, maybe I'd have this sort of moment of realization where I said, like, wow, hey, my ancestors were fucking pieces of shit. And now that I have access to the levers of power, maybe I should do something that will materially change people's lives for the better, rather than pass legislation that continues to disproportionately lock up people of color or cut taxes for the very wealthy to the detriment of everybody else, as I'm sure you're going to get into, Dwight, with George W. Bush. But this is the club. Yep. This is the club that we talked about in our episode about the Democratic primary. Nobody has greater class consciousness than the rich. Nobody has greater solidarity among their ranks than the rich, and nobody has a clearer understanding of the idea of class struggle and of class warfare than the rich. And it's because of an economic system that allows this wealth to be hoarded in this way and passed on down the line from generation to shitty generation. Each generation more oafish than the last, more cruel than the last, more greedy than the last, that we're stuck with a political dynasty like the Bushes. So, with that said, in moving on to the next generation of this awful, shitty family, in talking about George H.W. Bush, like I said, we already know his origin story, I guess. Shane, you already talked about his family lineage a little bit.
And his distinguished war record, of course.
His distinguished war record, yeah. So, I guess what I really want to talk about is the way in which he used that wealth and his family connections to further the interests of the American ruling class all around the world, most specifically through his work with an institution that his life, his businesses, and his political career are inextricably tied to, and that being the CIA. So George H.W. Bush was born in Massachusetts in 1924. Like I said, named after his maternal grandmother, George Herbert Walker Bush. Now, he had this typical sort of fucking Little Lord Fauntleroy prep school shithead upbringing of I guess, any wealthy New England WASP of the era. In 1941, like you said, he joined the Navy, served in the Pacific for the remainder of the war. But then where his story gets interesting is in 1945, he enrolled at Yale University, same as his father before him. Now, during his time at Yale, he was a member of Skull and Bones.
Hell yeah.
Like you mentioned, his father was.
Like another famous Walker, Paul Walker, in the movie The Skulls.
Now,
I'm going to go. Now, what I'm going to say isn't all entirely proven. but I'm going to kind of go out on a limb here and say that he was almost certainly brought into the fold of the intelligence community during his time at Yale, if not as a full-fledged agent, then at the very least as an asset or an informant. So secret societies like Skull and Bones at these elite institutions were looked at as fertile grounds for CIA recruiting efforts at the time. I mean, because ultimately, what is the purpose of the CIA other than to do the sort of dirty work of the ruling class? I heard a very apt description of what the CIA is one time. It might have been Chomsky, I don't recall. That basically what it amounts to is sort of the grease or the oil that lubricates the gears of capitalism and sort of keeps them churning along efficiently. You don't always see it working, but it's always there. It's always working first and foremost in the interests of the American ruling class and in the name of American empire. You have a political assassination that needs to be carried out in Latin America? Do you have a coup that needs to be fomented in the Middle East? Do you have maybe a billionaire pedophile who knows too much that needs to be murdered in the Manhattan jail cell? I don't know. But the CIA is always going to be there to carry out these kind of acts and to lend a degree of plausible deniability to the elites and to the government in responsibility for some of the worst atrocities carried out in the name of capitalism. So then, of course, it's no wonder that you want an agency like this staffed top to bottom with members of that same wealthy elite class. So at a place like Yale University in the 1940s, this is where you're going to find, I'm putting this in quotes here, the right kind of people. Exclusively white, exclusively wealthy, exclusively men, overwhelmingly Protestant, who have a vested interest in the furthering of the ruling class agenda and who probably are all true believers in the myth of American exceptionalism, because why wouldn't they be? Look where I am. Look where my family is. And also because so many of these students are legacy admissions, there's a degree of vetting because, they already know who your father is. They already know who you are. They know who your family is. They know you can be trusted. From Yale's class of 1943 alone, at least 42 of these young men were recruited into the intelligence services, and nearly every major player involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion had been in Skull and Bones. Now, not all of these recruits enter the agency itself. Many of those who go on to work for large multinational corporations, they might become informants, specifically informants providing intelligence from, behind the Iron Curtain. And it's very likely that that's exactly what Bush did. Like many rich, shithead children of privilege, Bush was sort of handed a job after graduation. He went to work in 1948 as an oil field equipment salesman for Dresser Industries, a subsidiary of Brown Brothers Harriman and Company, which you mentioned earlier, Shane. Where Prescott Bush had sat on the board of directors for 22 years.
Do you think when you get in the job interview, they give you the little Nazi party pin, or do you have to get that after a year of working there?
You have to earn it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Only yeah. What is it? Only closers get the Nazi pin.
Yeah.
First prize is a Nazi pin.
So basically, George he was handed this job, offered this job by the chairman of the board and longtime Bush family friend, Henry Neil Mallon, who George H.W. Bush considered an uncle. And worth noting here, and again, this is going to draw another one of these some of these families, these people that you mentioned, Shane. Worth noting here is that both the Mallons and the Bushes were close family friends with Allen Dulles of the Dulles family, who you mentioned. At the time, a former OSS agent and an official at the CIA who would go on to lead the agency from 1953 to 1961. By the way, Mallon and Dulles, both also Bonesmen, alumni of Yale and of Skull and Bones.
Bonesman.
Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles, really two of the primary architects of the Cold War during the Eisenhower administration. So Dresser Industries, basically what Dresser amounts to is basically a fucking front for the CIA. This is what George Bush is likely really being hired to do. Mallon would steer prospective candidates toward Dulles and basically provide employment for CIA operatives Obviously there's enormous political influence in the oil industry, and keeping the world's oil reserves firmly under U.S. economic control was just as much of a priority then as it is today, especially with the specter of the Soviet Union and the fear of communist revolution spreading throughout the world. So Bush at this time, he's living in Texas, but he's traveling back and forth constantly to Eastern Europe. So anyway, after that tangent, so Bush at this time, he's living in Texas, but he's traveling back and forth, constantly to Eastern Europe, having been put in charge of handling the company's negotiations and dealings in the region, like in Yugoslavia and in the Eastern Bloc. Now, again, this is largely speculation, but I don't think it's too crazy to believe that at the time when the Cold War policy was to covertly undermine and stop the expansion of the Soviet petroleum industry, that this well-connected child of privilege with deep family ties to the intelligence community, who's working in Eastern Europe, put there specifically by the chairman of the board of this company, himself with deep ties to the CIA. I don't think it's too crazy to believe that he would be there in the capacity of providing intelligence to the CIA, especially considering that just a few years later, he can be definitively tied to the CIA. In 1953, Bush founded the Zapata Offshore Drilling Company. By the late 1950s, Zapata had moved one of their oil rigs to about 50 miles off the coast of Cuba, and the CIA was using it to train Cuban anti-communist exiles. Now, basically, what they were doing
Are you fucking serious?
No, this is true. This is 100% confirmed. This is not speculation. This is not crazy conspiracy theorizing. This is true. So basically what they were doing was using the Zapata Oil Company as a front. They were giving Bush a list of people to hire, and he would then hire them, give them employment cover while they were trained there on the platform for raids on Cuba.
What the fuck?
Yeah, buddy. Mm-hmm. So as a side note here, according to a Kevin Phillips book, I don't know if you got this one, Shane, American Dynasty, the Bush-Walker family had significant sugar holdings in Cuba.
Oh, yeah.
And, and that their land, their mills, their machinery, all of it was seized by Castro's revolutionary government, which is very cool. But so not only in his capacity.
Wonder why they're so anti-communist.
No, it's just ideological, Dwight. It's just they don't like the godlessness of it.
Right. It has nothing to do with the personal financial stake that they might have in it. Oh, my sugar plantations. So all of this is going on. This is long before Bush has officially associated with the CIA and before he enters politics even. And one more thing I want to mention as a side note, there's a story from The Nation in 1988 that they found this memo from the desk of Hoover at the FBI that was written about 10 days after the Kennedy assassination, where he's talking about some sort of briefing. I should have written it down so I could remember it, but I'll summarize it here. Some sort of briefing it's like a brief that he's explaining to a couple of CIA agents. George Bush is named specifically. This is 1963. George Bush is named significantly as one of the one of the CIA officials that was briefed on the actions of anti-Castro exiles in Miami at the time after the Kennedy assassination, because what they feared was that the assassination of Kennedy, they were going to sort of use that was going to stir them up, and they were going to sort of use that as a kind of reason to go rogue and to go and try to assassinate or overthrow the government in Cuba without the permission of the United States government or the CIA. So that's what they didn't want to happen. So there's Bush, implicated by name by Hoover, in 1963 as having at least some sort of, association with the CIA, even though this was 15 years before he would officially become associated with them. He ran for the U.S. Senate in Texas in 1964, and he lost. And then he ran for the House in 1966 and won. Now, shortly after being inaugurated in 1967, Bush takes a 3-week-long visit to Vietnam.
What?
This is 1967. Accompanied by a senior-level CIA official. The trip coincides with the time period that we know the Phoenix program was being set up in Vietnam. And for those who don't know, the Phoenix program being essentially a terrorist training program, a death squad program, sort of meant to break the back of the Viet Cong. Really one of the worst examples of CIA atrocity during the Cold War. Responsible for kidnapping, torture, murder, tens of thousands of people, upwards of 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 people dying as a result of it. Now, little is known about what Bush actually did on this visit to Vietnam. What is known from his own contemporaneous notes on it is that he had great personal interest in and admiration for the Phoenix program.
Jesus.
And again...
Just coincidentally, he thought it was cool.
Well, now they're doing a lot of good work there in the Phoenix program down there in Vietnam.
Just coincidentally, he happens to be there at the time it's getting geared up, and he's there, literally in his first few months as a politician. Like, who the fuck? Why send this guy? And he's there in the presence of a CIA official. Weird, right? And not only that, it gets even weirder. It's unknown if Bush actually met with any of these people at the time, but many of those involved in the Phoenix program would then go on to work in Bush's office during his time as CIA director, and then many of them would resurface yet again in the 1980s during Iran-Contra. One of those people is Donald Gregg, who was heavily implicated in the Iran-Contra scandal.
These are just the same guys like we're seeing in the Trump administration, all these throwbacks from the Bush years. Fucking John Bolton. Like, it's all the same fucking guys.
Back again, baby. So Bush's tenure as CIA director was short. It was less than a year. He was appointed, obviously, by Gerald Ford, and then he got the boot when Carter took over. But his career was short, but it was illustrious. In that time, he was involved in yet another death squad program, Operation Condor. This time in Latin America, very much the same sort of thing as the Phoenix program. Training sort of these alliances with all these various right-wing military dictatorships, and sort of colluding with their intelligence communities, providing training and providing material support and all that sort of stuff. So in October 1976, a Chilean CIA asset carried out the assassination of dissident Orlando Letelier and his American aide with a car bomb on American soil in downtown Washington, D.C.
What?
You didn't know about this?
No.
Yeah, this shit's crazy. This shit's absolutely crazy. So, and at Bush's direction, Bush is the CIA head at this time. Now, the CIA deliberately leaked false information to reporters to mislead the public, and also misled the FBI in their investigation. Now, again, this is the brazen, sort of in broad daylight, very violent murder of a Chilean diplomat and his aide, who was an American citizen, in the heart of Washington, D.C. The CIA and George H.W. Bush himself, having full knowledge of who did it, people within Pinochet's government, and then providing cover for them and deflecting and misleading the public and misleading even, like I said, the FBI who was trying to investigate it. And so, again, we all know what happens next. Bush runs for president. He's defeated in the primary by Ronald Reagan, and then he's brought into Ronald Reagan's office as vice president. And then I don't want to get too much, we're running out of time here, but we all know around Contra, we all know Noriega and running the guns to the Contras, and then fucking, Noriega running the fucking cocaine back up the United States. We all know Bush's greatest hits of the 80s. We all know Bush's greatest hits as president: the invasion of Panama, the mass slaughter of civilian neighborhoods in Panama. We all know about his invasion of Iraq, his invasion of his bombing of Iraq, and his bombing of the retreating Iraqi soldiers who were on their way out of Kuwait. Basically, a lifelong, unrepentant war criminal at the heart. Basically, from the time he's in college, one of the really behind the scenes main architects, I would say, of post-World War II American foreign policy.
Absolutely.
That we're still stuck with today, responsible for untold suffering throughout the world.
It tilled the soil for Bush era, W. Bush era neoconservatism. And
you won't hear any of this. You didn't hear any of this because this guy only died. George Bush only died, thank God, back in November or December or whatever.
Also dead, so it's okay to say anything you want about him.
Yeah.
Tweet to him and John McCain while you're at it.
Does George H.W. Bush have a Twitter account? I don't know that. Because, by the way, it's really fun to @ John McCain's Twitter account and tell him you're going to steal his check mark. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm coming for your check mark, you dead bitch. So basically, when he died, all you heard, you didn't hear any of this. You heard fucking pious, lockstep hagiography from not just the Republicans, but from the Democrats as well, from the entire fucking corporate media. All you heard about was remember all the stories about his silly, he loves his socks. He loved his goofy, remember his adorable, like, fucking cute socks that he loved? Yeah.
Stop me if I'm fucking wrong, but didn't he grab his nurse's ass?
Oh, you better believe he did.
Yeah. To get his socks. He was trying to get at his socks.
Yeah, you better believe he did.
Oh my God.
Well, thank God when he died, he stiffened up his last pair of socks with rigor mortis. But no, all you heard about was that. All you heard about was how fucking nice he was to the Obamas and how nice he was to Clinton and all of this.
Exactly.
And this whole fucking bullshit display of this worshiping at the altar of American exceptionalism and this honor and this dignity that we're supposed to grant these fucking people. And if you think that one's aggravating, I know we all, this is the kind of the last thing I'll say here, but we all look forward to Henry Kissinger dying.
Oh, if that's not a holiday of the new left, I don't know what to tell you.
But it will be. But you better believe that, like, all the fucking stories on MSNBC are going to, like, heavily fucking, use the word statesman.
Statesman,
and diplomat. And they're all going to be probably about, how he was fucking, I bet he was so nice to his fucking friends. And, he liked fucking Reese's peanut butter cups or fucking whatever. I don't fucking know. Jake Tapper literally fucking sobbing like one of the fucking like people in North Korea, just like performative fucking sobbing after he dies. So yeah, fuck all these fucking ghouls.
I was watching, in preparation for this episode, the video from the state funeral from H.W. Bush, and they had him rest in state in the Capitol Rotunda. And I was listening to some of his son's eulogy, and like the title for it was like, George W. Bush, tears up or chokes up during his father's eulogy. It was just so weird to see just an unbelievable amount of state resources being put into this.
I mean, it's I mean, they're in certain other countries, they've had moments of like recognition or more kind of deliberate withdrawals after somebody dies, especially if they're considered tyrannical or awful, or after some period is gone, they'll like remove them from whatever kind of official state sanctioned thing is. Yeah, usually not super coupled with an apology or anything, just like as some kind of official act they'll remove these things. But no, in America we like have seemed to like, I mean, Chris, as you were saying, like there are these like media parades every time one of these ghoulish asshole dies, and I'm sure when George W. Bush fucking dies,
absolutely
there's gonna be a Ken Burns-esque documentary of like fucking 48 hours.
His painting, man. His painting.
There is, before we get too far away from it, though, there is another connection that just sprung to mind when you were talking about H.W.'s involvement in the CIA. Because, and again, this is something that we could potentially cut, but I really want to say it because this is something that I think about quite a lot. One of the things Hitler once said was, "The great victory of the totalitarian state is it forces its enemies to adopt its methods." And I've thought about that quote a lot, and the reason why, and usually, I mean, he was a, harebrained lunatic who's just spouting ridiculous nonsense, but every once in a while he would say something with some clarity. And that particular quote speaks to how in the Cold War, like the forces that had to gather together to defeat fascism and Nazism ended up in like literal ways adopting certain methods of the Nazi
Not just
program.
the methods, but the fucking people.
The literal people, and the person that came to mind, which is he's a Dulles boy, is a little Nazi, not particularly well known, named Otto Skorzeny. And he popped into my head because he was this, I believe he was originally Austrian. He was like a Waffen SS officer, and he was part of the, Nazi war machine when they invaded the Soviet Union. And he was like an intelligence officer for the SS, which for those who are listening, if you don't know, that was like the hyper, Nazi component to their military, right? Like, so he was involved in a number of these high-level terrorist campaigns, of which modern terrorism was basically developed by the SS. A lot of it was developed by him. In certain circles, he's known as like the grandfather of contemporary terrorism. And among his feats during the war, he was actually the guy who led the operation to rescue Mussolini. When the Italian people initially like overthrew Mussolini, he was like the guy who went to like rescue him and reinstate him. And he was an expert at that kind of like interpersonal either assassination or kidnapping and stuff. And after the war, somehow just like got away with all of it. A lot of this is like very secretive, right? But the West German government gave him this special legal clearance to just be like, we're going to acknowledge he was a bad guy, but we're not going to pursue him. And like, you know, who knows why they would do that, except then he starts turning up in like every fucking major Western intelligence operation that occurred until he died, which was in the 70s. And so among them is he was one of the guys who he had a plot to kidnap Castro in the mid-60s. He worked in Egypt for a couple of sort of nationalist terrorist groups there. Allegedly, he also was hired by Mossad. The irony there is like horribly striking.
Wow.
Wow.
But this guy went on to, you know, to help and work a lot in tangent with the CIA. And again, some of it is like hearsay and who knows what. Some of it, I just brought this up while you were talking. I'm looking at CIA.gov for their information on this guy, and they have a number of documents in which they name him as somebody that they've used as an asset. And so it's sort of like you were saying, Chris. You know, I mean, he was never maybe like an official member of any of these intelligence agencies, but the way that they operate and the way that the CIA operates is almost in the same way that the mafia operates, right? Where like you have guys who are in the mafia, who are part of the family or whatever, but for a lot of the stuff that they do, they'll go outside of that. You know, they'll hire a guy to do this or a guy to do that, and then if they're good enough and they keep working and then they show, you know, whatever, they're part of the Cosa Nostra via their stupid ceremony or whatever, they induct them in. And I guess the CIA version of that would be like, you're made if you dig up the bones of Geronimo and bring them to your fucking Skull and Bones Society. Yeah. But like, it's not a far stretch to say at all that the American intelligence community, specifically the CIA, literally adopted the Nazi techniques and programs that they used in their terror campaign across Europe.
Spread them all over Latin America.
For the sole purpose, as you said, to protect American capital.
Yes.
Yep.
And furthermore, they were involved in, one of the things the CIA did and the intelligence community broadly did is they put together this book. I forget the exact name of it. It escapes me now. But they put together this book that included every conceivable torture that you could do. And the idea of building this book, right, was for training. And so they got a lot of these tortures from the Nazis, again, and from like specific SS officers and various other people who defected, like describe all your tortures. And the idea was to train their operatives to be able to withstand, these kinds of tortures if they were ever captured by the Soviets or something. Now, of course, this book was used as a fucking blueprint in South America, right, during the 80s
yes,
and 90s.
Absolutely.
And then later, eventually was used in the United States under the George W. Bush administration. They just legally signed off and said, you know what, this book that we've been developing, that we initially started like during the Second World War, based on literally the fucking Nazi tortures, and that we've just been adding to like a family cookbook for 4 or 5 decades. You know what? We could just do this stuff to terrorists now. And they signed off on that. And of course, the administration that signed off on that is George W. Bush, if for the younger people in the audience.
So George W. Bush. Honestly, this was kind of a bit weird for me because I think for probably, most of our listeners, we have a lot of our formative years entrenched in the George W. Bush years, and there's so much that when I was researching this, it just came back to me, like the fact that every single late night talk show host hung their hat on every misstep of his verbiage.
Bushisms, bro.
Yeah, exactly. Everything came back to me, just like fool me can't get fooled again. Like just everything just kind of came flooding back.
We went to a park in Botswana.
That's my favorite one. I don't. Why does he just went to a park in Botswana?
Yeah.
It's the first time we've been back to Texas since our trip to Africa, and you may recall we went to a park in Botswana.
And honestly, I guess if we're gonna do this anyway, my I can't tell if the park in Botswana is my favorite one or where he goes,
We must stop the terror. I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Yeah. Okay, my favorite. My favorite, if we're doing them, my favorite is I think he's at a summit with some kind of Chinese trade ambassador or something, and he tries to exit on the stage. And there's like a ceremonial like fake door thing,
so
and he tries to open the door, and he just stands there, and he just looks at the crowd, and he's just like, like just so fucking stupid.
It was just constant, and it was like, honestly, thinking about it now and thinking about, like, you know, especially after we heard about the freaking Nazi past of Prescott Bush, like, they definitely had, maybe it was freaking Karl Rove, people that were saying like, hey, this is actually politically expedient for you.
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
While we're doing all of these, war crimes and class interest stuff, like, everyone's distracted at just how you misspoke.
So yeah, to a degree, it's almost that sort of like working class LARPing that we've talked
100%,
about.
100%.
Same as with Bush, same
Especially
as
with
with fucking
him.
in the ranch in Crawford,
Yeah.
Texas.
I mean,
you know?
Paid for with Nazi gold.
I forget if we said this on the pod or if we were just talking about this at one point, but like there was the clearing the brush thing. You guys remember that?
Yeah.
Because Reagan did that. He cleared brush, and so they had like they did an interview with Bush clearing brush.
Yeah, man.
And it was supposed to be like, I'm just a regular guy. I'm clearing brush on my gigantic ranch that
bought with slave
Nazi money.
Exactly.
My ranch of dubious value in this fucking Death Valley. Like, I'm clearing, like, tumbleweeds and tossing them onto a pile of dead veterans.
So since all that stuff is clearly, like, very, very close in our minds, what I wanted to go through is, what did the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, accomplish according to their class interests? Because, I think we all just remember it being a very, very, very bleak time, and there was seemingly nothing we could do to combat it because they were extremely powerful. So let's take a look at what they were able to accomplish to make the rich richer, because honestly, that was the entire doctrine of the entire of the Bush administration. So to set the stage for you, here's a snippet of an article from the Telegraph, February 2001, right after Bush took office, entitled "Multimillionaires Make Bush's Team Richest in History." Of the 16 full cabinet members, 13 have assets of over $1 million. Even on the most conservative of estimates, however, the average wealth of each member of Mr. Bush's cabinet is $11 million. A senior Republican said, "If these people are wealthy, it's because they're good at what they do. That's why they have been asked to serve their country."
Oh my God.
Get the fuck out of here.
I know you'd like that, Shane. I knew you'd like that. And it closes with, Mr. Rumsfeld submitted a 94-page financial disclosure form. His shareholdings read like a directory of America's defense and electronics industries. So, I think we did a pretty good job of covering the Bush family's riches. And just as a quick little aside, since we're talking about the Bush administration, let's take a quick look at how Dick Cheney personally profited from the war in Iraq. In August of 2000, Dick Cheney officially parted ways from Halliburton. And just think about that for a second. That was, 3 months before the election? And it was only then that Dick Cheney officially parted with Halliburton. The board cleared a compensation package of $34 million. So let's do a little math on this one, because I got a little bit of information on how many shares he actually got. 1.16 million shares, which at the time, at $25 a share, equaled about $29 million. After his architecture on the war in Iraq, Halliburton at its peak towards the end of the Bush administration netted $52 per share. If he had held on to all of those 1.16 million shares, it would have equaled about $60 million, which is not a bad profit for him and his buddies and fellow former board members. He was able to double his money, and only 500,000 civilians had to die. Not a bad job there, Mr. Cheney.
As another quick unrelated aside on Dick Cheney, so during the 1980s, as the representative from Wyoming, he wrote the dissenting, opinion in Congress on the Iran-Contra scandal.
Really?
Saying that it was, in fact, nothing was wrong with it, and then it, in fact, was a model for how the United States should conduct foreign policy.
The imperial presidency.
Right.
That was his goal, the imperial president.
And then he shot someone in the face. So, just as an aside. So let's focus in on what did the Bush administration accomplish monetarily for the ruling class. Let's talk about the Bush tax cuts. The first tax bill was signed into law by President George W. Bush in June 2001. It was known as the Economic Growth and Tax Relief Reconciliation Act of 2001, which is honestly pretty stunning, seeing as he had only taken office 5 months prior.
Reconciliation with who?
Exactly.
Well, who is he trying to reconcile with? The people who already own everything? What the fuck? God damn it!
So, EGTRA, as it was known, lowered federal income taxes.
Cool acronym, bro.
Tax rates.
That's awful.
It's great. They reduced the top tax rate from 40% to 35% and reduced rates for several other tax brackets. The act also reduced capital gains taxes. It raised pre-tax contribution limits for defined contribution plans and IRAs, individual retirement accounts, and most importantly, eliminated the estate tax.
The death tax. That's what they like to call it.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, we could probably go and do an entire whole episode on the estate taxes, but I just want to reduce it to one simple sentence. If you truly believe in a meritocracy, you would have an estate tax at 100%.
It's almost as if they don't believe in the bad faith talking points that they peddle all the time, Dwight. It's
amazing.
almost as if that's what it is.
I mean, how can you believe that everyone needs to pull themselves up by their bootstraps or work themselves into a higher economic class or whatever when you're going to inherit $750 million?
Yeah, but you gotta pull yourself up by your bootstraps with the Nazi money. You can't.
Yeah, I'm using boot hooks that have like swastikas ingrained in them to pull myself up by my own bootstraps, and then as I pull them up, I click them, and they make that clinky clanky iron heel sound, and I go Achtung, mein Kommandant, right before I go to work at fucking Halliburton. These goddamn motherfuckers.
Of course, the tax cuts couldn't pass the Senate with at least some Democrat votes. So were there any notable contrarian votes on this? Let's take a look and see some two familiar names we know and love. Dianne Feinstein voted yay. Herb Kohl, remember him? The senator from Wisconsin who owned Kohl's department stores and was worth over $500 million, he voted yay as well. I wonder why. Again, class interest. So what were the effects of the tax cuts? And this is one in particular that I really love if we want to kind of debunk some of this conservative or ruling class propaganda. A report published by staff at the conservative public policy think tank, the Heritage Foundation, our friends of the pod, claimed that the 2001 tax cuts alone would result in the complete elimination of the U.S. national debt by fiscal year 2010. Did that happen? No. There's no...
Look, you can't measure it by some insane metric of what they promised would happen in 2010 when the results of the Bush tax cuts can be seen in late 2007, early 2008.
Exactly. So after Republicans retook control of the Senate during the 2002 midterm elections, Bush proposed further tax cuts. With a little support among Democrats, Congress passed the Jobs and Growth Tax Relief Reconciliation Act of 2003.
Shut the fuck up.
Who are they reconciling with?
Exactly.
Reconcile with me, motherfucker. Okay?
It cut taxes by another $350 billion over 10 years. The law also lowered the capital gains tax and taxes on dividends. I mean, just to color that a bit, I mean, they were just getting away with a bit more. They were just getting greedy because they had the votes in the Senate to be able to do that, right? The Republicans retook the Senate during the 2002 midterm elections. They were like, fuck it, let's try to get a bit more out of it. Collectively, the Bush tax cuts reduced federal individual tax rates to their lowest level since World War II, and government revenue, so taxes, right? Government revenue as a share of gross domestic product declined from 21% in 2000 to 16% in 2004. A 2012 Congressional Budget Office analysis found that the tax cut reduced federal tax receipts by $1.2 trillion over 10 years. Now, $1.2 trillion. That number stuck out of my mind when I read that. I don't know if it sounds familiar to you guys, but if I'm not mistaken, last year, the total outstanding student loan debt was $1.2 trillion. It has since ballooned now to $1.5 trillion. But, you know, we think a lot about, like, what could we do with the money that was reappropriated under our new left socialism? Literally right there, we could have abolished student debt. If it wasn't for the Bush tax cuts, we could have abolished student debt. Not to mention, and I want to inculcate this anytime we talk about what are the benefits of socialism or moving to a more democratic political economy, the soft benefits that we get. If you didn't have student debt, think about the hours you could spend on childcare or child bonding if you didn't have a second job. Or just the societal preventative medicine by not having the stress of an entire bill that our parents never had to deal with at the same age. Now, I don't want to dwell on this too much because, you know, the focus of this episode is to talk about the Bushes, but we have to speak about Obama's role in his crusade for the ruling class and aligning himself with the interests of the ruling class as well.
To that, just really quick, I mean, it's not like he made those tax cuts permanent.
Weird that you should mention that.
Oh, did
because, well, on January 1st, 2013, the Bush tax cuts expired. However, on January 2nd, 2013, a day later, President Obama signed the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012, which reinstated many of the tax cuts effective retroactively till January 1st. So it was a good 24 hours. You know, you want to get it all if you can. The 2012 Act did not repeal the increase in the highest marginal income tax rate, which was, again, from 40 to 35%, which had been imposed on January 1st as a result of the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. So, you know, again, this is about the Bush years, but just talking about the Obama years, I think we run into this with liberals a lot, and I'm asked this question, and I'm sure if you identify as a leftist, you are interrogated a lot due to your beliefs, and people challenge you by saying, well, you know, people say to me like, you know, Dwight, well, if Obama wasn't such a good president, who is then? And for me personally, I do have an answer. I think the answer was that there has never been a good president. Personally, I believe that there has only ever been one good vice president, which was Dick Cheney for shooting a corporate lawyer in the face. So I wanted to do something for you guys, for all the listeners, to kind of color our understanding of what the nature of taxation is in the United States. Because everybody's familiar with the term tax brackets. But what is a tax bracket? I mean, basically, you get taxed a certain percentage of your yearly income at the end of the year based on the level of income that you made. So currently, according to the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, let's take a quick look at the 7 potential tax brackets you can be in.
You break this all down, Dwight. Just hypothetically pretend that I'm really dumb and need this explained to me. This is helpful.
Simply put, if you're filing as a single person, they go as follows, rounded to the nearest thousand here. It goes from $0 to $10,000 of income per year. You're taxed at 10% of that. Up to $39,000, 12%. Up to $83,000 per year, 22% of your income is taxed. Then from $83,000 to $158,000, 24% of your income is taxed. Up to $200,000, 35%. And up to $500,000, 37%. And then from $500,000 beyond, it's 37%. So as you can see, it's nominally progressive. Theoretically, the less you earn, the less you pay. But what's interesting is the stunning omission of higher tax brackets. The range of people making more than $500,000 per year, as we know, is enormous. But how much is it? And how can we put it into perspective? And for you folks listening, I did a little bit of math here, did a little yang gang magic. So
is this our endorsement?
That's right.
Cut his
That's
mic.
our official
Cut his mic.
Let's take a look. How can we appreciate the tiny amount of taxes that billionaires are giving in comparison if we don't know the scale, right? How can we really appreciate this? What if we converted each of these dollar amounts into seconds? If each dollar, according to these tax brackets, is 1 second, if each dollar is 1 second, $10,000 becomes, again, just reading off the tax brackets here, $10,000 or 10,000 seconds becomes 3 hours. 39,000 becomes 11 hours. 83,000 is about a day. 158,000 is 2 days. 200,000 is 2.5 days. And then the final tax bracket, 500,000, is almost 6 days, right? So $500,000 and up, the same scale, you get taxed the same scale on the 500,000 as you do $1 billion. So how much is $1 billion worth in seconds? Again, 6 days for 500,000 seconds. $1 billion would be 32 years. It would take us back to the Reagan era when freaking Addicted to Love was top 10 by Robert Palmer, right? So when escalated to time, the largest tax bracket, according to the IRS, covers those who earn, in seconds now, 1 week as those who earn 32 years. Now, let's put that into further perspective. Let's take on the ridiculous argument that working hard, long hours is what makes you rich. Let's just say we brought the minimum wage up to $15 per hour. How long would it take you to earn $1 billion at $15 per hour? Assuming you work a 40-hour work week and assuming you work 52 weeks per year, because in America there's no regulation around vacation time, and let's assume you never get sick because your manager will fire you or pass you up for overtime. Assuming this, at $15 per hour, you will become a billionaire in 32,051 years. Now, in fairness, you could get a second job. Maybe you can get your car. And you could pick up a shift with Uber.
You just start packing a lunch. Stop eating. Stop eating out.
Get dusty.
You could do a few. Marketing trials at Altria, packing a fat lip.
Hell yes, dude.
In general, you're really gonna have to put in the hours. And to put that into perspective, of when we think about how much we're compressing our time, like a billionaire is essentially hoarding hours worth of worker time. Even if we got, and the federal minimum wage is about half of $15. Even if we got the minimum wage up to $15 per hour, it would take 32,000 years worth to become a billionaire. If we're putting that into the context of the Bush years, what was the cost of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and the war on terror? The creation of the Department of Homeland Security. So I looked up a little bit of data here. If you take a look at the total cost of the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, the associated conflicts in Pakistan and Syria, as well as the total cost for Homeland Security, in 15 years, between 2001 and 2016, the United States spent $4.8 trillion. For that, you could have forgiven American student debt 3 times over.
Yeah, but you can't put a price on freedom.
I mean, what was the point of this? All the time, we're asked as leftists, as socialists, as people that are wanting to move towards more of a democratic society. Yeah, but how are we going to pay for it? Like AOC said this. Nobody asked how much the Space Force was going to cost. It's going to take an amount of money to create a democratic society. But Jesus Christ. One of the biggest things that we can do to create a democratic society now is abolish student debt. And if we know empirically, literally data staring us in the face right now to say that we could have done it 3 times already since the beginning of the, quote, war on terrorism, of what use was it?
To that particular talking point, because it's one that, and I'm trying to hold it in right now for the sake of our listeners, but like when I hear that phraseology, like, oh, how are you going to pay for it? I literally internally become hotter than the surface of the sun. Like, it just makes me so fucking mad when I hear that, because like there's a really handy chart that I highly recommend to everybody who listens to this to check out, made by the War Resisters League, which is a pacifist anti-war organization in the United States. They make one of these every year, and it's a pie chart that just shows how much of your tax money goes to the Department of Defense, because a lot of this is clouded in secrecy. A lot of it is deliberately obfuscated, not only in like kind of the general media discourse that we're talking about, but also like they hide the fucking money internally within the Pentagon and stuff. They shift things around, so the money that's going to one thing doesn't really seem like it's going to another thing. But anyway, they do this really handy pie chart every year that shows you what percentage of your tax dollars, and it's around to over 50%. So over 50% of your tax dollars, if you're paying federal income tax, is going to the Department of Defense and its various projects. Right? That doesn't even include, by the way, the actual operating costs of like war, which are considered not part of the official Department of Defense budget, but overseas military contingencies. Oh, no, I'm sorry, not even military. They've stricken military from it now, so it's now overseas contingencies, which is a nice like little bit of linguistic whitewashing, right? Like, but I've studied these deeply. Like, this was part of my journey into leftism and doing like anti-war protesting and stuff. These leaflets would be handed out at various places, and I remember there was one in particular that really struck me, and it must have been in 2011, and I got one of these pie charts, and it has a breakdown, right, and shows all the different departments that your money goes to in the federal government. And then there was like a little side column, and I went into the actual budget, which is listed publicly. You can find it on whatever government website. You can look into the budget, and if you're smart enough to read through the legalese, you're a better man than me, but it is there that in that year alone, Kraft, the cheese company that makes singles.
Yeah, I'm following you.
They made $1.2 billion off the war in Iraq because so much of the war is privatized. And a lot of the services that are provided for both the military operators there and the civilian contractors are privatized out to different companies. So the point in here being is not to single out that particular company. I mean, Pepsi also made a killing. A bunch of these other like food production companies have these huge.
They put M&Ms and shit in the MREs.
Yeah. I mean, they like American capitalism makes a killing off of these neo-colonial adventurous projects.
So when we put that into context with the Bush years of who got rich off of this, not only did all of the shareholders, the majority shareholders of these companies that were profiting off the war in Iraq, the profiting of the spread of white supremacy,
yes,
the spread of American imperialism, and this, the kind of global fossil fuel hegemony that the Bush administration was looking to garner, an enormous amount of people got rich in the process. And if we take it back, if we kind of looking at this whole episode of how the Bushes got rich, how the fuck is that different from how Prescott Bush got rich with the Nazis?
Yeah, 2 words: war profiteers. That's what these motherfuckers are.
Not different at all. It's the exact same thing, just separated by 60 years. It's absolutely criminal. I mean, the fact that George W. Bush feels comfortable, going on a Jimmy Kimmel or there was some talk show that he went on recently.
He danced on Ellen.
Oh, come! He danced on fucking Ellen! Oh my god!
Jesus Christ!
I need to say this because you brought it up just now, Dwight. But like, there was this moment because obviously the Bushes and the Trumps have bad blood because of what happened in the 2016 primary, right? And so after that, in 2017, there was in the fall or late summer, George W. Bush, former president, was like, he had established some kind of stupid institution. I don't even remember the fucking name of it. It was called like the Liberty Institute for American Freedom. Some entirely garbage fucking name like that.
Gibberish.
Like,
gibberish.
And they had the inaugural, opening of this institution in New York City. And so he gave the like keynote speech for it. And in the speech, he basically made a couple of digs against Trump without naming him by name. And one of the phrases he said was, "There is no place in the United States for white supremacy." And when he said this, it was to rapturous applause. And every single one of these little bitch liberal media institutions ran glowing op-ed pages about like, oh, this is what a true statesman, there's that word again, a true statesman would say. And all of these things. Now, first of all, that's ridiculous because as much of a gaffe-ridden buffoon Trump is, George W. Bush is also stupid. He's a dumb human being who
He was the original fail son.
He waltzed from mistake to mistake in his presidency, including almost dying by choking on a fucking sports game pretzel. Okay? Now, second of all, the other thing that really pissed me off about that is that he had this line of, there's no place in America for white supremacy, and everybody gets up and applauds. And well, guess what, motherfucker? Invading Iraq is white supremacy. The global war on terror is white supremacy.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So the idea that somehow we can now bring these people back into the fold and be like, oh, that was a gentler time for America. that was before all this racism happened. You know, when Prescott Bush was making fucking millions off of the slave labor used at Auschwitz, literally, somehow this family is, no, they're the true, scions of America.
Well, they're far less crude, Shane.
Right, exactly. It's not like
they're far less vulgar. It's all aesthetics. Donald Trump, for every bit of a fucking fascist and a monster he is, does not have enough time. Even if he wins re-election, does not have enough time left in power to get anywhere near the amount of blood on his hands that George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush have on theirs.
I think you're right. Miss me yet?
That should be the episode picture. Just like a George W. Bush that says, "Miss me yet?"
Done.
Well, I have a good anecdote to wrap things up, maybe.
Please do.
So I was at the hipster coffee shop. I just moved and I found a new hipster coffee shop, and I was trying to just get my frappuccino or whatever, and I overheard at one of the tables this guy said, "I will not rest or feel complete in my life until."
Jesus.
Well, that's not making it in.
Oh, come on! I heard it at a coffee shop. I heard it said, and then I turned around, and
wow,
they just they disappeared in like a thief in the night.
That's not even close.
Oh, come on!
Wow. No, so by the way, I don't know. It's worth mentioning, I guess, that I think I shared this with you guys. But did you know that that Jenna Bush, George W. Bush's daughter, is now she's a co-host on the Today Show as of a couple months ago. It's just adding to
again.
There's not enough daughters of war criminals on daytime television. Where's Henry Kissinger's granddaughter? Is she busy? Put her on Good Morning America.
By the way, Meghan McCain, Ben Dominic, please unblock me. They just if it's another argument against, like, they truly do not believe in the meritocracy,
no, of
just
course
because
they
of their
don't.
birthright of being a Bush.
I mean, this is equivalent, right, to the landed gentry of Europe, over which supposedly the original American Revolution was fought against, right? It was like, we are trying to disentangle ourselves from this feudalistic society in which your birthright determines your lot in life, your significant importance. And again, under feudalism, you have all these rich, fail sons of nobles who go on to either join the clergy or to become statesmen. Like the guys who are not good enough to go to the military academy and kill a bunch of other Europeans in some awful fucking war end up becoming, the intellectual class, the intelligentsia of the community. And capitalism, was supposed to, in its revolutionary intent originally, was supposed to detach itself from this. And it's the same fucking thing. It's just detached from this antiquity sense of lineage, but nonetheless, in our moment now of late stage capitalism, all of the people that we're talking about, right? These are the heirs to unjust gains. These are the people who have, again, they've made their money off the fucking Nazis or some other horrible war. They're almost equivalent to feudal warlords, except for the sense that they didn't even have the guts to fucking fight in these goddamn things. They're just war profiteers. It's the sons and daughters of war profiteers who have done nothing in their life in any meritocratic kind of way, to be I've earned my place and blah, blah, blah. And yet, nonetheless, they have this outstanding, outsized influence on our politics and our media. I don't like them. I don't know what else to say. I'm trying to say something that won't get bleeped. I really don't like them.
Stay serene, folks.
Stay cool, folks.
I'm gonna say one more thing, and this can also be cut or whatever, but it's just popped into my mind again. A kind of sheer physical rage that I feel about the rehabilitation of the war criminals of my youth, which is to anybody who is maybe a little bit younger than us, anybody who might be considered a Zoomer, whatever stupid name we're calling our various generations, do not let Trump become this cartoonish buffoon that we all laugh about later. Do not allow fascism to simply be written under the rug as like a about like, oh, he was such a goofy guy. Remember when he said the stupid thing? And then we're all dying from climate change. Like, hold these people responsible. Do not let, because the ruling class deliberately picks stooges so that they can fucking do their operations in the background. I mean, again, this goes back to what Chris was saying about how the CIA operates. The CIA is going to pick dumb patsies, like the mafia does. A patsy that can take the rap. If he really needs to, he's the one who can go down. Well, we all continue to do our shit in the background. That's who fucking GW was, and that's who Trump is.
Stay cool, folks.
Stay cool, folks.
Sorry, I did it again. Fuck. I'm just so mad right now. God damn it.
Let the eagle soar like she's never soared before, from rocky coast to golden shore. Let the mighty soar with healing in her wings, as the land beneath her sings. Only God, no other kings. Let the mighty eagle soar. This country's far too young to die. She's still got a lot of climbing to do. And we can make it.